To close a week of events as part of JMI's Holocaust Memorial Day Events Programme 2022, we will soon be screening our feature programme Under Newborn Stars, which tells the story of photographer Maya Blumenfeld from her upbringing in Berlin to escaping Nazi Germany and resettling in New Zealand. After the programme will be an interview with the film's chief curator and the granddaughter of Maya Blumenfeld, Rosanna Bagley, and the film's soundtrack composer, Tal Janes.
To be able to see things, to express something, to convey something without words, and that you can record reality.
How did you first get into photography?
We had to sort of try and get some kind of so-called profession instead of going to university, because that wasn't possible because of the political situation. So we went to get some profession advice, my father and myself. And the lady asked my father, does she like art? There is a studio who wanted a pupil. And that's how I got to it. I connected with it. So I stayed with it. It was quite fortunate, in fact, to put it mildly, that I was guided to this and also to that particular studio. I didn't have my own camera at that stage. I learned with the studio camera at the studio my friend Helmer had. Because of the circumstances, they could not have a studio outside the home. It would have been risky because they were a mixed marriage. So they had to combine all in one. It was the only safe way. I wasn't taught a special style. We did pay a lot of attention to the lighting, how the light connects with what the face expresses. That is the important part. You can't have it interfering. It has to be in harmony.
How was it growing up in Berlin in the 1920s and 30s?
From my point of view at that time, a wonderful life. One important thing was that one felt very connected with the whole world. It was all one. Very free and a very good education. And the possibilities of going to the theater and the opera. On the other hand, one has to say there was a lot of poverty around. One was very conscious of it. One didn't ignore it. One had a great lot of sympathy for it. But for us, some of the friends, like my friend Gerda, it was actually a wonderful life. And so all the more it hit you when it stopped. The political was disastrous, but the political was disastrous on one side, and the other was the opposite. As for leaving people behind, there was a disaster. It wasn't by any means an excitable thing to do, but of course there was the possibility of being able to carry on.
Can you talk a little bit about the journey to New Zealand and the life on the ship?
We were lucky, I think. It was a beautiful ship. And you were able to have the days, well, like a dream in a way, apart from what was left behind. But the actual journey on the boat was quite wonderful. And of course, it was exciting to see new places. We didn't really mind that it took so long. My brother Connie played tennis with the girls from Australia. Yes, he was very popular. And of course, refugees like us, quite a few. We kept together and talked and had something to eat together on the journey. So it wasn't a lonely thing. I suppose it affected us for life, because first we were able to do it. Secondly, we actually saw those wonderful places we've been hearing about. The best part of that journey, actually, was to go to Pompeii, where they had these excavations. They were actually starting in those days. And to see those poor people after the earthquake, and that we did see that despite all, it's quite amazing, really. I do remember a very beautiful, quite special impression. The land of the long white cloud in front of you, and it's beautiful. It is an impression you actually don't ever forget. But coming into Auckland Harbour was a bit peculiar, a bit funny, if you know what I mean. There was people standing there at the pier, signaling and greeting. Now when I look at it, very nice of them, but I thought it was a bit peculiar at the time. I don't remember any emphasis or anything peculiar about being German or Jewish. We were just coming from the other side, getting used to New Zealand. We used to always have visitors on Sunday. The whole room full of all these refugees. And then, of course, we felt we are refugees, not so much German Jewish, and more the fact that we were refugees. But outside, I don't think I was so conscious of that. My time at the Star, it isn't a deep, lasting impression. The photography that one did on one's own stays more in my mind than the Auckland Star, because there I was conforming to what was required. I do remember taking these outside photos, reportage as they called it, and that was lovely. I actually really enjoyed it. And it's the last thing I remember in connecting with the Star, because from then it fell apart. First of all, I got ill. I had tonsillitis, and a very bad one. Also, because of the war. We were then enemy aliens. We weren't that in the beginning. We were just refugees from Europe. I had to give up my Rolleiflex and to the police quarters in case I might turn to be a spy. I could have been, couldn't I? Yes. Oh, that was terrible. It was not only that you had to give up something that you actually loved and need. It was also that they thought they could, from a human and political point of view, treat people of that kind the way they did. I don't make so much a distinction between human and things. I can see only that it all belongs together. The things belong to the human person. Most of the things we left behind, or we lost, or the Nazis robbed us of them. And things do have a connection with human beings, even on your own, on their own sometimes. And some of it, of course, is here now, where those poor darlings that were originally also connected are no more. I would be more attached to the very early things. That is part of what actually is lost humanly, and as far as belongings go, and remnants of letters, for instance. As for that matter, also photographs. That's the most precious connection. My uncle, sitting in his room, listening to that little transistor radio. It was sent to my father to Napoli from my uncle and aunt and my cousin, who was only a boy then, when they were still living in Berlin. 37, and we went in 38, and they didn't make it.
Can we go through some of your photos from New Zealand?
This one I actually do like, the little Chinese girls. And look how depressed and frightened that poor darling is. And her bigger sister, of course, has more confidence. That must have been 38. This one I'm very proud of. That is Anzac Day in Auckland. That's Ruapeo, and those two fully dressed at the beach, New Zealand side. This is my brother Connie and how with me in Auckland. If we put them together, we can say they are here. And so they are. I like to be with them. It's like to be with your best friends or the people you like to be most with. I know people always say, oh, we must be so grateful that we're here at all. And actually, they are right. I do agree with that. It's true. But the other dears that aren't here, that as much part of you now as they ever were. And it hasn't stopped by the fact they were treated the way they were by some very unworthy human beings. And I agree with when at the time of the Spanish Jews, which was an equally terrible, terrible disaster, they always used to say that the truth cannot be touched by flames. And I think this is true in this case. The truth cannot be touched by whatever horrible thing has happened, because a person, a human being, is there forever. From my point of view, to remember all that has happened, yes. To build a life and virtually war lives and organizations on the fact of the deadly thing that has happened. I cannot go with that. I cannot go with that. What lasts and outweighs is their humanness that is here and that is also lost. Well, actually, it's very nice to have the photo taken. It's like coming home. It is coming home. That would actually not change with the years. That stays.
Is this camera used today similar to the camera that you used to use?
Yes, absolutely. Oh, that's a real friend. It's a real friend. Yes, very similar. A different make, but the idea, yes, the same. A friend. Yes, it's a lovely studio. I haven't been in a darkroom now. That I could say. Oh, again, the 40s.
There will now be an interview with the film's chief curator and granddaughter of Maya Blumenfeld, Roshana Bagley, and the film's soundtrack composer, Tal Janes.
Hi, I'm Roshana Bagley. I am a multidisciplinary creative based here in London. And I'm here to talk to you today about Under Newborn Stars, which is a short film based on my grandmother, her experience, and her life as a photographer. So I grew up in London, but I also spent almost a decade in New Zealand as well. And I originally have a background in sort of fashion and textiles, boutique industries, etc. And then I pivoted a couple of years back into advertising, essentially. I've always been fascinated by narrative and always had a love for storytelling, and decided that that was the route for me. Growing up Jewish, but also being part Black Jamaican. I've always grown up with stories of, and knowledge, should I say, of the diaspora, of the Windrush, familial experiences as part of who I am and everything I do. I'm also very close to both grandmothers, particularly Maya, being a very doting Jewish gran. And I try to implement their stories and their experiences as well with as much as I can do within my field. So with this particular project, with the film, it's part of a bigger series of work. It's part of an ongoing series of work, and it sort of found me more so than I sort of came to my mind, so to speak. So originally, way back when, Maya left New Zealand in the 60s and relocated to London. And at that point, after losing so much, of course, at that point in her life and so many things being taken from her, she decided to leave the photographic collection with family, as it was too fragile. They're made up largely of glass plate negatives and not just photos. So to bring that in transit could have been really awful. Fast forward to the mid 2000s, whilst I was living in New Zealand, she'd asked me to collect them from a local historian. A family member had passed on, and so they were given to him to care for. And naturally, she wanted to keep it in the family, and she wanted to see them again as well. So I collected it on her behalf, and then when I moved back to London, did manage to bring them with me, to my amazement. So we spent a lot of time together going through them, looking at the faces, the names, the details, and it was incredible. Despite her having not seen them for about 60, 70 years, she remembered most details and faces. So that was really, really special to see her face, her reaction after so much time, to sort of remember that part of her career and her life. I've always been quite interested in history, and I've always I had a love of photography as well. So it was a really quite incredible experience to sit through this time with her. Equally, as she's lived through so much as well, and there's been so much stories to tell of that part of her life, I wanted to start trying to document everything that was said. I'm not familiar with the details and the faces and the names, and there was a lot to take in. And so I started trying to note take and sort of like make sense of what was happening and who these were, sort of unknown faces at this point. Also, it was really important for us as a family, I think, to have this first and foremost for us. My gran now is incredibly also a great grandmother. So it's important for future generations to be able to document this and for us to know. But I didn't really know what I was starting. You know, it's quite a big project, and it's an incredible thing, and it's become quite a big part of my life. But so within trying to document things, I think it's also really important to hear directly from her. You know, she is still present, she is still here. It's her story, although I'm perhaps note taking and trying to archive. So I thought a film perhaps could be the best way to introduce her story. She hasn't talked about it with those outside of the family. It's not been something that she's really made public. And so whilst on lockdown, essentially, and at that point on furlough with a lot of time on my hands, I decided it was the perfect time to do that, essentially. So I don't have a background in film, but that didn't really deter me. I have some fantastic friends in the community at work as well, which were really supportive of the project. And so I asked a dear friend called Hedvig, who is an emerging filmmaker, to come on board and help me make it a reality. And she did a fantastic job. And so we worked together over those months, along with other friends and colleagues in my team, to do that. So we filmed essentially over just two days over the weekend, and spent time with Maya, who she absolutely loved it. At the end of the 2 days, I was exhausted, but she could have kept going. And she really came to life, and to see her again, and also in a photography studio for the first time in so long, was really special. She was like a teenager, and she remembers the darkroom fondly, and really, really enjoyed the experience. So as and where I could within the project and the team, I wanted Gran to be part of the creative process as much as possible. And that also meant knowing the team members that were involved. And so she actually watched early edits with me and fed back as and where she could. She impressively remembered details that myself and Hedvig didn't even remember. So she was kept sort of up to date every step of the way. And also with that, so I wanted her to, as I said, know perhaps the team that was supporting the project, and that also meant Tal. He was the first person who came to mind, of course, to support on the score, not just because he's my partner and because I'm biased, but he's very dear to her. And equally, knowing his profession, what he does, and he does it so well, and also coming from a similar background, I thought he would be fantastic, and he definitely rose to the occasion. So it was quite an incredible experience. It was very easy as well. It was very smooth. First of many projects, hopefully, that we get to work together on. And I think he did an incredible job. Hats off to him.
Hi, my name's Tal James. I'm a guitarist, producer, session musician, and composer based in London. I grew up here. My parents are Jewish. My mum is from Israel of Persian descent, and that's always been, part of my identity, which I've taken pride in. I was self-taught for about 7 years, making music with my siblings. I've got a brother and a sister, and friends basically, and then went to university to study jazz, which was very new for me at the time. And then, just went on a huge sort of 7-8 year mission of getting into that, which was great. And then since then, I've just been finding myself again, which has been lovely. So over the last, 6-7 years, I've been part of several groups in London. So bands I play with are Waju, Maria Chiara Ajiro, Nubian Twist. I've played with Zara McFarlane, Jordan Rakai, and I have had my own group for the last couple of years called Bala, and that's how we got in touch with JMI initially. And that was a project where myself and a friend, Joseph Costi, were really interested in researching Jewish music and bringing it into the kind of jazz spectrum, and working on that relationship and coming up with our own compositions, which was a really important part of my journey as a musician. Roshana approached me to work on this project over lockdown, and that was a real interesting time for me musically, because for me, I'm very used to being part of society and playing with people and having constant collaboration, and then I suddenly found myself in this situation where it was mainly, I was just mainly by myself. So finding new ways to entertain myself just, playing by myself. When this project was presented to me, I was already working on a few kind of solo guitar ideas and things like that. And at the time I was working on, just a simple idea of playing with open strings as a sort of sound world to play within a sort of starting point. And when I was presented with the first edit, I felt the film in sort of three different moods, mainly. And I wanted to have something which wasn't changing too much, but very organically was alive and felt human, and was constantly kind of growing and moving, but wasn't too attention grabbing. So for the process, I had these ideas on the guitar. It was one piece initially, and then I realized I could break this down and extend it into three sort of different sections. So I started off with everything I did. I didn't want to copy and paste stuff in a computer. I just wanted it to be organic and played through, so they always had that human element to it. So I started off with a drone just going boom, boom, boom. I played that on a synth or a piano for 5 minutes, 3 times, and I just slowly built it up. And then I had the first theme, which is the first thing you hear in the film, and I played it, and I just played it whilst watching the film, and I just sort of interacted with Maya's speech, and just when it felt right to play, I played it. And also just kind of, if I were playing with a singer, for example, like if I would add any embellishments. So I had that as a bass layer, and then I had to sort of replay what I did with a synth bass or something. But I think the journey because that's what it felt like to me. Maya was on this journey, and I was also on a journey in real time, just accompanying her speech and what I was feeling. And it was my first time playing to visuals in that way. And she's, she's for me, she's a very strong, she's this otherworldly figure. And that's something that really resonates with me in art, in music, and in people. This kind of untangible element. So for me, I had what I wanted in mind, and then the part of it for me was getting out of the way of myself, and that for me is the key to the kind of otherworldliness. Yeah, I think the way I approach composition and improvising is, like I said, it's sort of getting out of the way, and I think there's a certain kind of melancholy and nostalgia which comes with the Jewish element, which has always been present. And it's not a conscious thing. It's sort of an undercurrent to, just my taste and just where you grow up. That's hugely influential to everything. It's the fabric to your being in a way. So I think a lot of this is I have my palette, and this for me was honing into a very particular feeling. And having spent quite a lot of time with Maya, she's someone I really respect and I have a lot of time for, and I find really just a fascinating, interesting person. So just trying to channel that as best as I could through the process and the actual playing was really great. And so I wrote these 3 sections, and 3 different moods, kind of one sort of hope, more like 3 different colors. That's the way I approached it. And then I felt because at the end I felt like it kind of came back to the beginning, because intro, it kind of wrapped things up. So I had just moved into a new studio in Tottenham, and I found myself, because I share it with a few other people, so I had a few extra tools which I might not have necessarily had if I was not there. And I had this tape machine which I had been teaching myself to use, and it had the option to had a pitch control option, so you can slow things down. So I took the first one and, slowed it down, and it kind of just enhanced everything. I was like, maybe I should do this to all the songs, but I was like, no, I need to save it. And the rest was, just basically improvising on top of it, just adding little bits and pieces to keep the momentum going, because it is so repetitive. But yeah, I just wanted to feel human and just really supportive. So in terms of Maya's story, because my father is of Polish Jewish descent, and I think living in the UK, that's a more kind of that's a culture that is more tangible and something you see more in day-to-day life. Growing up in Edgware, it's like you see people of that origin. In terms of like connectivity, I feel like I haven't gone deep or like hugely identified with that side of it for some reason. But I did feel a sort of deeper connection doing this work with Maya, and connecting with her story. And it felt, yeah, it was interesting for me because I hadn't really like ever, I don't know, fully connected with it in my own terms, in terms of that era that she lived in, more just, on a cultural level. But yeah, so it was beautiful to experience it through her. And yeah, and beyond the film, like, yeah, just spending time with her and having her take on it, because sometimes there's a sort of cultural bigger idea and of what this part of history looks like, but I think to have like a very up close and personal experience with someone from that era is it's very special.